Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. The Man Crisis. Learn why so many men are struggling to find their way in an increasingly gynocentric world in The Man Crisis. Get your copy of The Man Crisis in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today.
Last weekend, there was a stabbing that took place at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And in this incident, a man who had been denied entry into the museum because his season pass had been revoked for erratic behavior exploded in rage, jumped over a turnstile, and then attacked and stabbed two employees. Now, the police are seeing this as an isolated incident, but when I take a critical examination of the suspect in this case, 60-year-old Gary Cabana, I see a textbook beta male that fits right in line with the pattern and profile for beta males that I talk about in my book, The Man Crisis. And from reports, your Gary Cabana was a man in crisis for some time, and it looks like the COVID-19 lockdowns could have led to him becoming an individual who had been simmering and boiling in anger for some time as his mental health allegedly wound up deteriorating, because extended periods of isolation for beta males in some cases can lead to them having their mental health deteriorate, and this is what possibly could have happened in the case of your Gary Cabana. He could have been isolated for an extended period of time, and this is what led to him winding up participating in extremely erratic behavior, because a lot of times when you have a beta male and he is isolated for extended periods of time, he enters into echo chambers, and as he enters into those echo chambers and he has no social interaction with others, this is what leads to this man winding up getting some twisted and distorted views of reality, and those distorted views of reality wind up with him going out here and having his rose-colored world become even more twisted. Now, as the pandemic lockdowns ended and your Gary Cabana began going back into the world, his rose-colored reality had become even more distorted and his behavior became even more erratic. And even though he had a full season pass for places like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, his behavior had become so erratic that he could not enjoy the museum in a way that met the terms of service or the guidelines of the museum, and this is what led to him getting kicked out of the museum and barred from the museum. Now, in a case of a regular man, he would have just chalked it up as a loss. Unfortunately, when it comes to beta males and their rose-colored reality, many of these men, whenever you deny them access to something, it becomes an obsession for them. And this is what probably led to your Gary Cabana becoming fixated on the Moma. And as he fixated on Moma, he wanted to go there again. And when he went there again, he thought, oh, I probably will be able to slip by. Unfortunately, the people at the front desk saw his pass had been revoked. And once they saw that his pass had been revoked, this is where your Gary Cabana, who had already had a deteriorating mental health problem and was simmering and boiling in anger, exploded in a rage and participated in one of the extremes as related to the spectrum of violent behaviors. Because in this explosion of rage over being denied entry into the Metropolitan Museum of Art, he jumped over the counter and allegedly attacked two 24-year-old people who were working at the front desk, stabbing them, but thankfully they did not get any sort of life-threatening injuries. But this whole incident shows us how dangerous beta males can be whenever they are locked down for an extended period of time, put into an echo chamber, and then they return to society. And when they return to society, these men become ticking time bombs where the fuse is shortened and all it takes is a minor incident to light that fuse and lead to these men exploding in a rage. And that's what happened here with your Gary Cabana. He wound up returning to the world, and he returned to the world a clear and present danger, and many people knew how much of a danger he was to others and himself, but sadly they couldn't do anything because here in America we refuse to acknowledge the man crisis going on in this country, and because we refuse to acknowledge the man crisis in this country, hundreds of millions of men do not get the help that they need, and many of these men wind up falling through the cracks like your Gary Cabana did, living in a rose-colored world that gets more distorted and warped, and as that world gets more distorted and warped, and they're trying to make life work in the real world, many of these men wind up running into walls and obstacles, and because these men do not know how to navigate their emotions or critically think, what happens is these men become more frustrated, these men become more angry, they simmer and boil in rage, and then when things don't work the way they want, they wind up exploding in that rage, and as they explode in that rage, they participate in a spectrum of violent behaviors in places that never saw violence, because your Metropolitan Museum of Art was considered to be one of the safest places in New York City, and it was considered to be one of the places people could go to get away from all of the violence. But there is no escaping the violence of your beta males, who are a good 2 to 3 generations in this country, and we have 2 to 3 generations of these males running around, simmering and boiling in anger. And as these men are out here, they are basically landmines littered all across the country. And what's really scary is it's not a matter of if these men go off, it's a matter of when. And what's really scary is that we're seeing an increase in frequency of these violent incidents. And many people would sit there and say that it is the pandemic and the issues as related to it. But no, this man crisis has been going on for a good 40 years. And all the pandemic lockdowns did was accelerate the fuse on many of these landmines. And that's why we're seeing so many men exploding in rage and participating in these violent incidents. And as these men increase the frequency of their violence, it is making America more and more dangerous. And as this country becomes more and more dangerous, it becomes almost unsafe for people in places here like New York to even be able to go out on the street. Now, your politicians want to say we need more gun laws, we need more police, and what we really need is an acknowledgement of them as related to this man crisis, because if we invest in our men in this country, maybe we could go out here and really make some gains as related to decreasing a lot of the crime here in places like New York City, because a lot of the crime has to do not with guns or has to do with violence. It has to do with the way we are raising boys to become men, and the way we have raised many of these boys to become men have created a whole bunch of ticking time bombs, because many of these men do not have good male life skills, do not have good male survival skills, do not know how to critically think, do not know how to use logic and reason, and many who did know how to do a little bit of these things, their whole mindset has been distorted and warped by an extended period of 2 years of isolation. And as they have been isolated for 2 years, their whole mindset has gone from a rose-colored reality to a dark, distorted reality, where many of these men do not even know how to function in the most basic way. So in some ways, these lockdowns further exacerbated the man crisis here in this country, and many people again do not want to acknowledge the man crisis in this country and the way we are raising boys. And the way we are raising boys is creating 2 to 3, going on 4 generations of extremely dysfunctional men. And as these dysfunctional men find themselves having a hard time navigating a world many of these men are becoming mentally ill because they're trying to reconcile frames of logic that do not work. And as they try to reconcile these frames of logic, this is making many of these men's mental health deteriorate. And as these men's mental health deteriorate, what happens to these men is these men become frustrated, these men become angry, these men simmer and boil in anger, and eventually they explode in rage. And as they explode in rage, they go out here and participate in a spectrum of violent behaviors, and those violent behaviors lead to all of the violent crime we are seeing in places like New York City, in places that were once considered safe, because no place on earth is ever going to be safe until we deal with the beta males we have raised and deal with the culture of the beta male we have socially engineered, because this culture of beta males is one of the things that makes the world more dangerous, because your beta male does not know how to function in a world that expects him to be a man, and he doesn't know how to navigate situations as related to conflict resolution or critical thinking, because many of these men, they have been raised in a dysfunctional fashion, and because they've been taught to feel and not think, these men react in a violent way when they can't get their way, and when they react in a violent way, they go out here participating in extreme acts of violence, and those extreme acts of violence make every place unsafe, and that's what happened here in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or Moma, and it took a tourist attraction and turned it into a place where people felt terrorized and unsafe. And no place on earth is safe as long as we continue to deny the man crisis in this country, because until America acknowledges that we have really messed up on 2 to 3 going on 4 generations of men and start investing resources in America's men, we're going to continue to see continuing increases in frequency of these violent incidents, and we're going to be seeing more and more violent behavior from men like this. Now, what's more disturbing is after this man took to social media in the aftermath of the attack, he taunted police for not catching him, and then he moved on to Philadelphia in a hotel where he allegedly set fire to that hotel. So this man's behavior shows me clearly that he's a man in crisis, and sadly, he may not get the mental health counseling. What he may get as related to things is he may wind up getting into the prison system, and that's where a lot of people who have mental health issues wind up. They wind up in the prison system because America's systems as related to people's health, mental health, is extremely bad ever since Ronald Reagan closed all the mental hospitals, and many of these people can't get the help and counseling that they need, so they wind up in the prison system, and these men in crisis wind up never getting the help that they need, and they wind up becoming even more violent once they get released from prison. So this is a sad incident for New York City, because this impacts the travel and tourism here and shows us how dangerous things are, because we here in America don't want to acknowledge the man crisis, and because we don't want to acknowledge the man crisis, we are seeing again incidents like this happen in places we never thought they would happen. But that just shows us again how dangerous having 2 to 3 generations of beta males is, and having those beta males is a clear and present danger, because it's like walking on eggshells here in New York, because you never know when one of these guys is going to go off, and you never know what he's going to do when he's going to go off. And everybody wants to think that putting more police is going to solve the problem. That may do a short-term thing, but long-term, we really need to do something about this man crisis here in America, because we're going to reach a point where there aren't going to be enough jails to house these individuals, and what's going to happen is these ticking time bombs, they are going, once they go off once, they may go off again. And if you don't deal with the small issues that at the beginning by investing in these men, you may have to deal with a public disaster where sadly we may deal with another great American tragedy. And the greatest tragedy of all is we could have stopped all this by dealing with the man crisis in this country. Now, if you want to learn more about beta males like the one I talked about in this video and what makes them behave in the erratic and disturbing way that they do, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Man Crisis on Smashwords, the iBook Store, and Google Play. And this book has helped many men in crisis get themselves together, and has helped many men learn why they are behaving the way that they are behaving, and help them move towards a path where they can start working on healing themselves and moving themselves ahead. So you can find that book on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format, Smashwords, the iBook Store, and Google Play. And if you want to see me make more men's issues videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and Kindle, Stop Simping in Cyberspace. Learn how to avoid predatory females like Instagram models and e-girls in their virtual con games with Stop Simping in Cyberspace. Get your copy of Stop Simping in Cyberspace in paperback and Kindle today.